Welcome to the I Don't Believe in Astrology podcast. The podcast is dedicated to conscious souls looking to change the world. Astrologer by day, climate activist by night. Here is your host, Debra Silverman.
I am only human. I have my faults and my shadows that are as bright as the light that shines within.
This podcast, brought to you by the stars, ready for this? Zach probably doesn't know this, is called the I Don't Believe in Astrology podcast. So it welcomes all people from all over that are just wanting to flirt with the idea or have been studying with me in different ranges. Zach Bush came to me through a connection that I really respect. These lovely women in LA. I was just on Blue Earth's podcast, and I was wowed by the level of her awareness. And then she was wowed by you. And I was like, I want to talk to Zach Bush. And so here we are with the promise. He did put a condition on this that I would give him a reading. I thought that was very cute. Oh, I'll do it if she promises. Is that true?
That's it.
That was a very good deal. I thought that was a smart man that knew. And you hadn't heard of my work before.
No, I mean, I've heard of you, but I'm not familiar with your body of work. So excited to get exposed.
Okay, great. Nothing like a Scorpio getting exposed. So let's start with the podcast's invitation is for me to look at your chart somewhere in the middle of the session, just to be able to reference what you're going to speak to. And it's a completely transparent, candid conversation. I too, like you, have been interviewed so many times, and again, I get so annoyed because it's the same questions all the time. So I've come off the beaten path, which, by the way, Mr. Aquarius Rising, you're built for. I'm interested more in some of the conversations about things that you love talking about, but don't always get put into your interview. So first you have to introduce yourself. I can certainly tell everyone a renowned multi-disciplinary physician, Dr. Zach Bush, endocrinology, hospice care, and a recognized educator on, tell me how to say this, microbiome.
Microbiome, yeah.
Microbiome. I'm so interested as it relates to human health, soil health, food systems, and a regenerative future. So it's interesting because the entrance of my podcast, the first interviewer was a man, Jeff Orlowski, who wrote the best documentary on coral. It was called Chasing Coral. And it was Netflix #1 documentary because the coral on the planet has been very sacrificed to the point of 50% of the coral is dead. No one ever talks about it. And it's, in my language, it's all about water. You can't see it. If 50% of the trees on the earth were gone, we would be crazy. But because it's coral under the system, we can't see it. It becomes this hidden secret, which is about your chart. You've got a very rich, deep inner world. Is that okay to say out loud?
I think so. Yeah. It's not a surprise to me for sure. But yeah, I mean, in some ways, his story of coral is unfortunately repeated on land. And for as obvious as it seems like it would be if we saw trees disappearing, that actually is happening, and we are unaware. And so unfortunately, we cannot believe the amount of damage we are doing above ground as well. And so we are at 97% of Earth's arable, meaning farmable soils, are now deplete or severely deplete and rapidly desertifying. 97%. And so we are so quickly destroying the habitats by which we survive, and we remain unawares. We're unaware that the United States doesn't grow its own food. We think that our farmers, our country is covered in farming, and something like Kansas is covered in 90% farmland by acreage, and yet 1 in 5 children in Kansas goes to sleep hungry every night, and Kansas has to import 90% of its food, because our farmers are no longer growing food. Our farmers are growing
the monocrops. Is that what is the result of?
Yeah, we started growing commodity monocrops in the forms of crops that rarely go into a human. And so we are growing the majority of our cropland for ethanol for gasoline additive, or for agricultural inputs for animal feed that go into high intensity feedlots for cattle, swine, chickens, and the like, as well as things like fish. Our fish farms are now largely being fed genetically modified corn as a feed, and as you might imagine, fish weren't supposed to eat corn. So it's just a bizarre, completely abstract, completely almost science fiction state of affairs in our food and agricultural systems now. There's only one county in the country that grows more than 10 species of eat edible foods, and that's Fresno County in California. They grow 300 species of edible foods. So Fresno County is really our last semblance of an American food system that would actually end up on your plate. And so we are so close to the end of food sovereignty. We've lost that for sure. Like the pandemic revealed this, right? We suddenly saw grocery store shelves empty and all that. During that time, not a single farm, acre changed in the US. We were still growing an enormous amount of produce, but none of it was ending up on a plate, because it hasn't for many decades. And so it's unfortunately.
We grow an enormous amount of produce, but where does it end up?
Yeah, so it ends up in gasoline. So corn being the best example of this, but corn, soybeans, and others are either being converted to ethanol for gasoline, animal feed, or textiles is the third big category there. So a lot of it goes into plastics and things like that for polyesters and things that you're wearing on your body.
I don't wear polyester. Don't put me in that club.
Well, you as a general statement of being human.
I cannot. But so this is so interesting, Mr. Scorpio. So you have this very strong, as you know this since you were a kid, this very strong Mercury, which is at the last degrees of Scorpio, meaning that your mind, Mercury is how the mind works, goes underneath things. Like he's not satisfied with the surface level of anything. Like you're kind of a detective who pulls the thing up. I mean, as a kid, I can imagine. Did it show up when you were little that your mind was just so curious?
Yeah, it's hard to know, when you are just yourself, and so you don't have any comparison to what other people are experiencing in life, and you just are going through life. And especially as a child, you just are experiencing life in a very simple way. It's happening around you, you're experiencing it, you're envisioning it, and it's very difficult and maybe impossible to have some sort of outside perspective on how you're behaving and how that might be different.
Was there any clues by your teachers? Was there any recognition?
I don't know. I don't think so. I was so quiet as a kid. What was obvious is I wasn't thriving in the usual academic environment. It wasn't hard for me. I wasn't like failing, but I was never like really stimulated by it. And so I spent the vast majority of my teen years in particular, from about age 11 on, I was very much outside of the classroom learning. So I spent most of my time underneath vehicles.
That was my point.
Yeah.
You were underneath things.
Yeah. So I was in garages for more than a decade, building cars, and started doing construction and all that. By the time I was 14, 15 years old, I was cleaning construction yards initially. And then that quickly got me, holding the end of wire for electricians, or holding the other end of the plumbing pipe for plumbers. And I started to learn from the very bottom up how to build houses, and eventually would become a general contractor when I was going through residency and doing all my subspecialty training in medicine. I also got my general contractor's license at that phase and started construction.
That's so interesting, because you have no earth in your chart. Did you know that?
That I have no earth? No, it doesn't surprise me. I still can't figure out why I'm here.
Oh my God, that's so funny. Well, meaning that your earth element, building things and constructing things, was a stretch, because your natural rhythm by your chart is this deep thinker who's taking on global situations and trying to change. You're like a change agent. You're like trying to get us to go over here, but you spent your childhood learning earth by default underneath buildings and creating contract. I love that story.
I'm still building. That's still my passion. Actually, if I'm not actively building, I get a little bit despondent. And so I've built multiple large engineering firms. I just built a big energy company. Over the last 7 years, we built a 40-foot mitochondria that digests plastics, farm waste, and tires into biofuel. And it took us, 7 years and a ton of engineering and millions of dollars to build that thing. And now we're going to scale globally with a new form of biofuel.
What does it do?
It digests long chain carbons down into liquid fuel and solids for remediation of soil systems and things like that. So we can take 100,000 pounds a day of waste stream from long carbon chains, which could be plastics, agricultural waste like wheat straw, rice straw, corn husks, sugar cane, which is bagasse. We can take any of those materials and turn them into liquid fuel in the form of biodiesel, kerosene, heavy and light naphthas. All three of those go into jet fuel. And so we're trying to become an alternative to fossil fuels as a sustainable, renewable form of carbon fuel.
Wait, I want to back up for a second. I was going to ask if you're an optimist or a pessimist, but I really want to know who made up that machine.
I did. I'm the founder and CEO of the company. To say I did it alone is ludicrous. It's been hundreds of engineers and everything else that have been working on it for a long, long time. So, but yeah, I came up with the idea because of mitochondria, which was my area of expertise in cancer research. So I was developing chemotherapy compounds at the University of Virginia from vitamin A, which was my introduction into nutrition. Understanding that I could kill cancer cells with food rather than poison was a big breakthrough for me. And we were working on, bringing this to market as an alternative viewpoint on cancer therapy. And so I was working with mitochondria, which are the little bacteria that live inside of our cells to produce energy and communication for the human body. And mitochondria use long chain carbons, the glucose and fatty acids, to produce energy. And so as I started to study global collapse of biology and the sixth extinction that we're in, I started to realize that one of the main threats to the human survival is disruption of our endocrine system, which is our hormonal communication network, which is being disrupted by plastics. And so I thought, plastics are the biggest poison on the planet. And I was taking it from that viewpoint, and then suddenly realized, wait, that's just a long chain carbon. Why isn't that our primary energy source rather than a waste stream? We have gigatons of plastics on the planet now, which means that we could, become one of the biggest oil companies in the world if we just started converting that to energy. And so we set out 8 years ago now to start to see if we could build a 40-foot, version of a mitochondria, which inside your cell is tiny. There's 200 mitochondria in every single one of your living cells. There's 2,000 in every neuron in your brain. So there are so many of these little factories of energy taking long carbon chain into energy that we decided we could maybe do this. And it turned out that there had been long efforts to convert plastics to fuel that I had been unfamiliar with, but we took a biologic rather than kind of physics approach to this problem, and ended up being able to build our first full-scale plant last year. It was completed in Colorado, and it's pretty exciting to watch it run.
Oh my goodness. I have had a passion for the last, I'm going to say not that long, 4 years of learning about the climate. This is how this podcast began. I call it the climate crisis. And I was like, where is everyone? I hadn't met Zach yet. Like, why is no one urgently attempting to prevent the sixth extinction? Because for God's sake, this isn't the first time we've been in this rodeo. And don't you think we'd have enough awareness to change the direction? That's why I asked about the optimist pessimist, because we just are a species who's a little bit, I know it's politically incorrect to say retarded, remedial. So I had this theory, said the psychotherapist, that perhaps the psychology of our brain doesn't have the capacity to step above, look at the angle, and then take action. But you seem to be a little bit of a futurist taking action. I'm kind of impressed, Mr. Aquarius Rising.
Yeah, I do a lot of that futurism for sure. So I've built a dozen companies and 2 big nonprofits that are focused on the future beyond the extinction event, and how we engineer our way out of that process by becoming in harmony with nature, and how nature's already solved for the climate crisis. Literally is already solved for it. It's already over. The climate crisis is already balanced, and everything else, it's just in our future.
Hey, but you talk so fast, Mr. Aquarius. What did you just say? It's already over?
Yeah, the climate correction has already occurred in the future, and the planet will be the greenest it's ever been in history. In a 4 billion year planet, we will have the greenest, most verdant planet on Earth.
Starting when?
That's kind of up to us, and it's up to us as to whether we stay and play. So we may go
Species, hold on, back up the bus, Mr. Fast Talker. So the planet Earth will survive and thrive. Did I ever doubt that? The human species, on the other hand, has a choice. We're at a moment, a very critical moment. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, we've got a choice to stay. And if we're going to stay, what is our role? And if we choose to be co-creative with the divine within ourselves and within this planet, we could see the most verdant planet in history within the next 100 years, rather than our extinction in the next 100 years. If we go ahead and stay the course towards our own extinction, it could take the planet somewhere in a few thousand to a few million years to get to its full potential. But we can be a huge accelerator.
We can help
that recovery.
Okay. Time to share your chart. Ding, 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 ding. Let me just pull this thing. Hold on. I love doing this little game. You push a button, you pull it down, then you go like this, you pull it out. Okay. Here we have Mr. Jupiter in Aquarius, Mr. Aquarius Rising, and it's trined by Pluto. Now, for those of you that don't believe in astrology, that was all gobbledygook. And for those of you that do believe in astrology, it's still a little jargon there. But let me start with his soul came in as Aquarius Rising, saying the soul is called the rising sign or the ascendant. It's what you're rising into. It's your higher self. And it's a futurist. And you happen to have Jupiter, the planet of what's the funnest thing you could ever do, in Aquarius, echoing what I just said, in the house of the magician or the mystic, where you get impressions from other places. Am I right or am I right?
Yeah.
And then to top it off, it trines Pluto, which gives you an excessive amount of energy mentally, because it's in Libra. Jupiter's in Libra, in Aquarius. So this chart screams, this is so interesting, my mental body's in the future. I'm technologically Aquarian, futuristically compelled by Pluto giving me this, I can't stop, I can't stop. You're a little obsessed. Am I right or am I right?
If there was 30 hours in a day, I would work every one of them.
Okay, perfect. Now, see these green dashes? There's two sets of green dashes here. You've got Neptune at 6 degrees. I'm circling it. You have Jupiter at 4. We've been talking about your Jupiter. You love science. And they all point to Saturn, which is a yod. These two green dashes are very unusual. And they're pointing to a planet called Saturn, which gives us the yod. I'm going to first break this down. The word yod is a Hebrew word for finger. It means you've been pointed at this life. Before you got here, you signed up for a contract and you are indicated by the planet it's pointing at. The finger of God is pointing at Saturn. You are here responsible for two things. One is, you're going to love this, your family. Your life lesson and your willingness this life is to take your family's lineage and your emotional connection to them. And that's what motivates you. You cannot be an honorable man in your world and not take care of the children. Right?
Yeah, I'm all about taking care of all 2 billion of them.
Yeah, because Jupiter's in Aquarius is big. So it's a yod pointing to Saturn, telling me that you came into this lifetime with a commitment, because it's a predestined indicator. Not everyone's are activated, but yours clearly is. That yod points to Saturn. And so this lifetime you said, I will be a workaholic in the name of those children, in the name of my family, in the name of my concern for the humans, by going into the future and getting us prepared.
There you go.
How are you doing, Zach? How are you doing at your job?
It's been an interesting trajectory. You know, I left the university with $10,000 401k that I cashed in. That was all the money I had in the world in 2010, and was given a vision of what I needed to do, and it was to start, hundreds of companies and products and all this stuff.
Where'd that vision come from?
That's probably the $1 million question, I guess, as to where that came from. But it arrived.
In a dream, in an insight, in a download, in a feeling?
I don't know what you would call it. I guess a download is as accurate as anything. I was in my laboratory at the University of Virginia in 2010 in a pretty depressed state of my life. I had had all my chemotherapy research shut down by a pharmaceutical company with blocking patents, trying to make sure this didn't get to market. And that was when I realized I was working for a machine that really didn't have the care of humanity or the desire to cure disease at its center. And so I had spent 17 years in academia, a couple $100,000 in school debt. I had kids that were heading towards secondary school and college and all this, and I was broke, and I was being paid like 70 grand a year to be on faculty at the university, and couldn't even afford my own school debt. And so I was in this real trap that is set for doctors who try to stay in academia. And I was pretty depressed. And so I was calling out to the universe, to God in my prayers and everything else, and really desiring a revelation for how I could serve humanity without dying, because I felt like I was dying on a lot of levels, psychologically, emotionally, physically. I was exhausted. I had been working 80 to 100 hours a week in the hospital systems, and I couldn't have worked harder at being something positive for humanity, and I felt never further from that than I had in that year or so, as the pharmaceutical industry showed itself to be against my progress rather than for my progress. And so in that, I also experienced the university dumping me as we went through the recession, and they reneged on contracts, and there was just an interesting collapse going on around me. And in that call for a path forward, I was sitting in my lab, which is a fancy word for an old 1960s cinder block room with a single little window, lead paint everywhere, terrible fluorescent lighting, and 4 giant freezers in this little 8x12 office that were full of cancer cells and tumors. And so you can imagine the energy that was in that room with me day in and day out, as I was alone with 10,000 tumors. It was a pretty low state. And in calling out for my path forward, a huge set of information came through that I started scribbling on paper and everything else. And at any rate, over the course of that next 2 hours or so, I drew out what is today my life 15 years later. And so I didn't know how to move from point A to where I am today, but it's been quite a journey watching nature work through me as I surrendered my life to something greater than myself.
That is such an amazing, I got the visual of the cancer and the tumors and the freezers and the lead paint and the no lights. And you did a very good job painting that little picture. Thank you so much. And then you got the download, and then you became this agent of change. And I never got the answer because I moved over it too quickly. Would you say you're a pessimist or an optimist when it comes to the humans?
I am inherently an optimistic being. That seems to be an optimism that supersedes my state as a human in some ways. I can feel the nature within me these days, and I know that I am part of a system that is ever living and will never be suppressed, will never be blown out. This candle will burn for a long time, and much beyond this Earth's existence probably. And so I feel a light within me that is irrepressible and has been here since the beginning of time, maybe. And I believe that light burns in you, and I believe that light burns in every tree. And so there is something about life itself that is completely irrepressible. It is the physical existence of a life form, be it a tree or a human or an earthworm, is a finite manifestation of infinite energy. And so Einstein made famous the realization of relativity, which is to say that a light can be both a particle and a waveform at the exact same time. And that's what it means to be in a physical body, is to be in a particle state of an energetic form that cannot be destroyed. That's the first law of thermodynamics and physics, is you cannot create nor destroy energy. It can only be transformed in its nature. And the second law of thermodynamics is that any system left in isolation increases its chaos. And we have a planet that is the opposite. We are in a universe that seems to be in the opposite state of chaos. That word is syntropy. So entropy is the word for chaos. Syntropy is the word for organization, or the increasing amount of order within a system. If you are in a system that is increasing its order, you are being witnessed. We are not alone. We are being witnessed, and this universe is being witnessed by something outside of it. And so, is there a God, I think, is answered by the second law of thermodynamics ultimately. What is the word that we use for God? Many different interpretations of that one, and people have lived and died to try to prove their opinion on that word. But I am convinced that we are being witnessed by some sort of intelligent order outside of this universe, to allow this universe to continue to derive order out of a chaotic energy field.
Do you have their phone number? Because I need to call them. I want to know about the human psyche. I'm confused. We've been given the gift of life I live in the most beautiful, pristine place on earth. And by the way, the highest extinction rate is in Hawaii, which I found shocking.
Yeah.
I am so glad to hear your belief in that we are being witnessed and there is a higher level of intelligence, obviously, said the astrologer. And the humans, they smell funny. Why are they so mean?
I believe that there was an original wound. So, yeah, as a physician, my biggest passion has always been a root cause analysis of disease. And so that's how I found a new avenue to chemotherapy and cancer, was through that simple question of what's the root cause. And
Said the Scorpio, let me get underneath this. Let me get underneath this.
That's it.
And what was the root? So is there a root cause to cancer?
Yeah, there is.
I'm so interested.
It's isolation. It turns out that you cannot have a cancer cell exist if there is any connection at the cellular level. And so to develop a cancer cell, that has to reach a state of complete isolation. And it's the second law of thermodynamics again. If you leave any system in complete isolation, it increases its entropy. And so a cancer cell is the end of an entropic journey, or entropy journey, into chaos in a cell that had been syntropic. But to be syntropic, you have to be witnessed. You have to be connected. And so it's impossible to get cancer in a human body that's fully connected. And we connect each cell through fiber optic cables, it turns out. There's thousands and thousands of fiber optic cables that connect each of our cells to the ones around it. And this is a highway of information that is also followed by energy. And so light, energy, and information streams between each of our cells in a coherent and cooperative effort towards life. And there's an infinite amount of energy available for repair all the time, as long as there's these fiber optic cables of connection and energy.
Can you bring fiber optics connections back into English so the human person can understand? You will not get cancer if you are not isolated is a very powerful sentence. Can you translate that into human nature?
Yeah, so if you look at the macro level, I'll describe that fiber optic system, I guess, in a minute, but it also exists at the macro level. If you isolate a human being, one of the oldest forms of deep punishment for a human is to put them in isolation. Solitary confinement is what we call it in prison systems and the like. And if you put somebody in solitary confinement, within 24 hours, they are hallucinating and seeing other things and voices and all that, because their mind is creating a universe so that they are not alone, because they will die quickly in loneliness. And so your mind will create a whole universe around you in order to keep you connected in some semblance. And one of my favorite books that I grew up reading when I was a strange teenager, I suppose, maybe that's in my chart somewhere, does it say that I should be a strange teenager? But
you were definitely a strange teenager, yes.
And so I was an odd teenager, but one of my favorite books was Sermons from Solitary Confinement from Richard Wurmbrand, who was in prison with the Nazis during World War II. And Richard Wurmbrand wrote some of the most extraordinarily, exquisitely beautiful.
I am writing that down right now before we're finishing, because I can tell that your mind's appetite to go underneath the building, underneath. So isolation is the source of cancer. No one ever told us that, Zach. I guess you've told everybody.
Yeah, I've been doing my best at it. I've reached a few million people, but there's still another 7.8 billion that need information. So I appreciate
Well,
your effort to
isolation,
get the word out there.
if I ask you to translate it into human form, if someone's in a beautiful marriage and they have children and they become cancer victims, is this a symbol of their isolation? How would you translate that? How do you make sense of that?
So it's isolation at the cellular level. It can have, a macro expression as well. So certainly I was very isolated in my, what I just described to you in academia. After 17 years, I was in my isolated lab, disconnected from humanity in a lot of ways. I was too busy working to have a social life. I was too busy trying to support my children and be present for them to think about how I could reach other people. And so I was basically child raising and parenting, and couldn't figure out how to be a good partner in that either. Like, how do you be a good partner to your spouse when you're going through this journey? And I thought I was perfect, of course, at the time. It was like my most important thing was being a great spouse. So I was monogamous to beat the band, and I was always in my highest joy if I could find out what my wife wanted to next. And so I built her gardens, and I built her big giant tripods for her aerial silks. Whatever she wanted to do, I was determined to build it. I was always building something for her. And I thought I was a perfect husband and perfect dad and all of those things. At least that was my goal. And
but were you isolated? Is that what you're trying to imply?
Yeah, I was so busy checking the boxes in life, I think, and trying to do something important, that I became isolated from all things, most importantly myself. And I didn't know who I was outside of all these roles I was trying to fill. And so in my isolation, I became very depressed, suicidally depressed. And that's the journey of the human, ultimately, is to try to live our lives by some sort of external metrics, external performance that we think makes us valuable to those around us. And in that journey, we become completely untouchable to those around us, and they can't, no matter how much they love us, reach us. And so we become isolated through even our most altruistic efforts. We become isolated, and we become
Especially because of when those people that give too much lose themselves. This is your life lesson, Saturn in Cancer. Your life lesson, Saturn in Cancer, and you worked with cancer.
Yeah.
Did we just figure that out right now? Ding, 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 ding.
I knew I was Saturn in Cancer because I'm service oriented to beat the band there. But
and also this conversation, I really want to highlight this. One, that you believe in life force will never stop, that entropy and that thermodynamics allows the continuation of life no matter what, that the human condition, once exiting in this isolation, becomes connected. So talk to us if you had, Zach, to give us wisdom. I'm going to ask you some of my famous questions I asked during my podcast. If you had some wisdom that you could display, like you could just go, okay, you guys, I've done my research. I've been a maniac with my appetite for learning and growth. What would be your suggestion to the humans? And this is the sentence that we ask people to fill in. I wish people would fill in the blank.
Reconnect to nature.
Oh, my favorite thing to do.
That's all it takes. So I left the university in 2010, and by 2012, I started my first biotech company, and my laboratory is more advanced than anything I ever had at the university now. And we have the most extraordinary scientists working in this lab, and we get to ask the craziest, most beautiful questions to nature as to what our potential is, which is not something you're allowed to ask in academia. All you can ask in academia is what is the next drug we can invent. But as we've started to be able to ask questions of the universe and cells, what is your highest expression? We've gotten to see some spectacular examples of our full potential of healing. And it comes through reconnection to the microbiome, ultimately, which is the bacteria and the fungi that live within soil systems and within our gut. And when we reconnect—
Wait, hold on a minute, Mr. Speed Freak. Say it again.
The microbiome.
So it's because I have this theory, and I bet you agree with me. I can see it already, that the digestive tract and the ability for the body to absorb nutrients is all dependent on that tummy. Am I right or am I right?
You're right.
And that
your word tummy means intestines there, but yeah.
You got the right idea. So that if the digestive tract, and I have known this since I was very young, when I first found a naturopath, when I had gallbladder attack, and he adjusted my digestion. And ever since then, I've had impeccable. I learned how to do food combining, and I learned how to stay alkaline. It's probably all the stuff you talk about, but no one ever wants to hear about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's definitely changed. Gut health has, become one of the hottest terms in search engines globally over the last 10 years. So the world is becoming aware that gut health is really the foundation for what we're doing. So.
And we're back to cancer, because cancer rules the stomach. And so let's get this straight. So your theory is you wish that people do it again. What do you wish people would do?
Reconnect to nature.
Can we just take a minute with that and slow down? And how do you do it? I'm so curious.
Well, so that's what we've been showing in our laboratory, is that if you reconnect to soil systems, your cells go into the most rapid form of repair and healing that you can possibly imagine. And they become resilient against the most severe toxins that we've ever created. And so we create basically a superhero like biology by keeping human cells connected to soil systems. And what
does that mean, keeping humans connected to soil? You're saying things like, you're sounding like an Aquarius rising. What does it mean to have humans connected to soil systems?
Let me tell you. So there's
the right guy.
There's a family of molecules made by bacteria and fungi when they digest nutrients. And this is largely been referred to as fulvic compounds. These are small carbon molecules that we call in the laboratory carbon snowflakes, because each bacteria and fungi might make unique versions of these molecules depending on their species. And so each species can make 15 or so variants of these carbon snowflakes. And when you put these carbon snowflakes into an aqueous state, i.e. within water, you get a liquid circuit board that moves information at light speed. If you think of your neurons and endocrine systems as your main communication networks in the human body, these are traveling at like the speed of sound, very slow. Speed of light, 186,000 meters a second. That's where you're starting to get into this like quantum state of information exchange, and that's done through these carbon molecules. The category is called redox molecules, reduction oxidation redox molecules. And so these redox molecules that can communicate across the system, we discovered to be contained within these fulvic extracts of ancient soil. And so we've been
fulvic extracts, spell it.
FULVIC extracts. And so fulvic and humic molecules are a big, huge family. A very small subset of those are these redox molecules that would we know what a
fulvic, would we even identify it, or it's only scientific?
Yeah, no, it's just something that would be defined in the science literature at this point. It's not really in the common lexicon. But it's basically, you can imagine it as a soil extract. And so it's a soil extract from, we developed our own engineering company that extracts this from fossil soils that are about 60 million years old. And then we put those into a liquid supplement. And those supplements have been on the market for the last 10 years or so.
And what are they called?
Intelligence of Nature is the brand, Ion. And so Ion Gut Health was our first product out 10 years ago. And it's an incredible witness to the power of nature's capacity to heal us. And it's a very interesting thing, because the compounds don't actually do anything to your body. Instead, they connect resources within your body to do its healing by its own charge. And so it's the first time we've had a product on the market that actually is the mechanism by which that reconnection happens. And so this is literally the cellular reconnection to nature. And we've been witnessing for this the last 10 years as to its impact. So it has a huge impact on gut health. But our first big public health effort was with autistic children, because autism is the best example of a disconnection in an otherwise uninjured system. Autistic brains are not injured brains. They are actually hyperwired for intelligence. They just are disconnected at the gut ecosystem level. And so they cannot detox well. They can't metabolize well. So there's a lack of energy and a lack of repair and a lack of detoxification. So these kids become very vulnerable to toxicity and can be injured over time by their environment. but if you replug them in, it's unbelievable what they're capable of doing. And so to get an example of this, you can go on my global health education series. My last one was on autism, and I had two mothers who work with me closely now, and their two sons who were heavily affected autistic children when they were young. And both those boys are on the podcast with me or on the summit, and you get to meet these kids, and they are geniuses in their own right. And you get to see, their journey from nonverbal, screaming, 14 hours a day, hitting their heads on walls and smearing stool all over the place, to the extremely functional and brilliant minds that they are today.
God, this is so crazy. Hold on a minute. I just want to ask a few questions, Mr. Smarty Pants. First of all, how is it that the level of your intelligence and the solution of isolation becoming the result of health brought to you by the stomach, that this is not publicly sent out on the, what do we call it? Like the universal communication device. Why is this not common knowledge? What part of us, Mr. Scorpio, with Moon in Capricorn, who's so serious, what part of us has reluctantly or resisted or not known how to take the high road? I should be asking myself this question, said the psychologist, but you go ahead.
Well, this gets us back to the original wound ultimately. And so the original wound of humanity was separation. And this happened at the psycho-spiritual level, I believe. We're given a lot of myths and stories about how this occurred. We're told about a garden and the separation from the divine. Our separation from the divine state was the moment that we thought we were separate from. And this can be seen in ancient scriptures. It can be seen in more modern texts that have been, channeled or downloaded or whatever people want to call it. But the Course in Miracles, I think, is one of the most important documents of our recent times. And it details out our relationship to spirit, if you will, this infinite nature within us. And it details out how we broke that relationship, and how until we heal that relationship, we're chasing after the wind for our own sanity, let alone our own sense of spiritual identity or whatnot. And so in that, ancient to modern texts that have spoken to this, we see revealed this original wound, which is we have been rejected by, or we are against nature. And this plays out from religious texts all the way to Oxford University. If you go to the Oxford English Dictionary, it defines nature as everything in the firmament of the planet, minerals, plants, animals, everything except humans and everything humans have made. That's the definition of nature. And so we somehow wrote ourselves and everything we would put our hands to out of nature. And that's the original wound that continues to infect our behavior towards destruction. As soon as you think you're separate from nature, then you have to adopt a scarcity mentality that there's not enough. And once you're in a scarcity mentality, your only survival is a colonial mind where it's going to sequester more resources. It's going to take, make sure you hold on to everything as tight as you can. And this plays out certainly in empire building as we build empires that expand past our extract wealth and resources beyond our borders. The American empire has been horrific. The Chinese empire, the Russian empire, whatever it is, for thousands and thousands of years, we've been extracting beyond our borders, trying to bring nutrients and resources back to ourselves at our own destruction. Empires always fail because they aren't actually cancers.
But in the future, Mr. Aquarius, we have an optimist. I want to hear your optimistic take on how we're getting out of that story, because that is a broken record.
I believe that we're at the end of a long epoch of human history in this wound, and we are being given an opportunity to heal the original wound. It's taken us a lot of maturation as a species to get to the point where we're willing to heal. And that's really the last question that we have to answer is, are you willing? Are you willing to receive rather than take? And if you are willing to receive, you will be given more than you can possibly imagine. If you continue to, in your fear and sense of separation, take, you will die and you will disappear from the earth. And so this is our last question. Are we willing to receive from nature much more than we can possibly imagine? She heals so quickly. It is unbelievable.
I
In our
know.
laboratory, we can see healing happen at 100 times, 1,000 times faster than the injury occurs. All it takes is reconnection to nature. You put these soil suspensions into any human system, and the amount of repair, the amount of regeneration, the amount of complete reconciliation of biology with our original math is so profound and so immediate that you realize there's only one future there, which is one that is whole. Biology is always pressing towards a wholeness and a complete state of being. And it takes a human mind and spirit.
What do we take to make what's the supplement? I want it right now.
Intelligenceofnature.com is the website where you can see all the science and get
Intelligenceofnature.com. And what would be, if you were to say to start, that will support the body and being reconnected to nature, what would be the supplement or this indicate? What we need to know?
All three of the products that are on there currently are the tip of the iceberg of what's coming down the pike, but they are fundamental to the largest systems that support your body. So the gut health, the sinus health, and the skin, that covers 99% of your touch with the environment. And when you reconnect yourself to the environment through this intelligence of nature, these liquid supplements that reconnect each cell to its original math, who you become is pretty exciting. And I think I've become a much more complete and whole version and healthy version of myself than I was 10 years ago. I was the very first person to start taking this liquid, and I used to be crazy about it. I used to take so much of it, and we've come to learn that nature is so generous that it takes only a tiny amount to reconnect your ecosystem to her ecosystems. And so just a teaspoon a few times a day of the gut health compound.
I love this story. Okay, here's a funny question from our podcast. When's the last time you cried and why?
I cried this morning because I'm so in love.
Oh, I love that story. With someone, with the flower, with the dog?
All of it. I'm in love with everything. I'm in love with life. I'm in love with my life. I'm in love with the people that are around me. I'm in love with the beauty that's in this nature that we get to be birthed into. I'm so amazed at every sunrise. I just can't believe our fortune of having 5 senses that have been gifted with the capacity to see the beauty of nature in a way that no other species can. We've been given the gift of senses that give us the perception of separateness from nature so that we can see her. We are the bride of Christ, as it's been said. We're the bride of God. We are the partner to this divine state of nature so that it can be seen. That's why we were given the intellects and the 5 senses we have, was so that we can be witness to the beauty. And in that we step into our full purpose. That's why you're here. That's why I'm here, is to see the beauty. And you'll cry every day, multiple times a day, if you're awake and alert to the beauty around you, because it's insane. It is so beyond your capacity to hold on to the sensations that will course through your bodies if you see the beauty completely.
Is that why there's tears running down my eyes? Oh, I forgot where I was going.
We didn't have to go anywhere. We're here.
That was so beautiful. Oh my God. Is there a person alive or not that you would love to have a conversation with?
Oh my God, that's a long list. I'm only allowed to answer one.
You can have a couple. You go ahead. I do not limit anyone ever.
To begin with, I think I would like to talk to my grandmother, Nancy Bush. You talked about family and being connected to family. This is my family member that has believed in me bigger than anybody else, maybe even including myself. And she told me as a child what I was capable of becoming, and in the next few years, I'm going to become that thing. And she was anticipating this part of my career for a long time, and she felt it in me as a kid. And she was the head of the Library of Congress, director of Library of Congress, PR, and she would take me as a kid, especially in this trip that I did when I was 13. She flew me to Washington, D.C. alone, and I was born and raised in Boulder, Colorado, and she flew me there, and I came out of a pretty humble background. My parents were hippies, kind of rejected the whole East Coast theme and moved to Boulder independently, and then met each other there and decided to start a family and joined this little church that I grew up in and everything else. And so I grew up in this hippie church in Boulder, and grew up in low-income housing, mostly among the Hmong peoples who were refugees from Cambodia. This was the end of the Vietnam War that I was born into, and so Cambodia was exporting a bunch of its refugees to different communities within the United States, one of which was Boulder. And so I was living in low-income housing with all these Hmong refugees. And as a kid, you don't know any of that. You just know that your neighbors wear really beautiful garbs and these dresses. These women walked around with all embroidered down to their ankles, and they would crouch in their garden plot in the community garden that was adjacent to our low-income housing buildings in the countryside around Boulder, and they would squat in the middle of that yard and talk story. And so I grew up in that environment, and then get on an airplane and fly to Washington, D.C. And I was always gobsmacked with that city, and the power that was in that city was palpable to me as a child and remains so today. And I can feel the ways in which the sacred geometry of that city's design have been there, much like any other sacred site on the planet. It's designed to maximize the planetary and energetic systems that we live within. And somebody was there with intelligent design in Washington as they worked out the geometries of the mall there with the great monuments that decorate that city and all of that. And as a child, I would walk in that energy and be amazed by all of it. And then my grandmother would take me into the halls of the Library of Congress and take me to the original documents that formed our country, the Declaration of Independence. And the original copy of that is completely ridiculous. It's all scratched out and scribbled on, and nobody could agree on anything. It was pretty obvious. And ultimately it was basically Benjamin Franklin as the elder, and then a bunch of 18 to 20-year-old kids that wrote that document. Hamilton and all the other famous names that you think of around the Declaration. They were literally 18, 19, 20 years old. They were kids that were sitting at the feet of Benjamin Franklin that was writing out of his 50-year studies of natural law. And so my grandmother introduced me all of that and showed me a path forward to how I could start to change the world as a future leader. And I just formed this year.
What's your grandma's name?
Nancy Bush.
Nancy. Okay, this is such a great note to end on. The grandmother's presence inside this man's heart, with his Saturn pointing to Cancer as the point of his lifetime. And he's coming here to give us regenerative ideas of how to have optimism. So you think I want to finish with this. You think that the human presence on Earth there is an option for us to regenerate, to become aware of how to take the plastics, to change the carbon, to be able to make this thing work. And you're an optimist. Is there a part of you that is disheartened, or are you standing neutral with your faith? I'm curious where you stand as you talk about this.
I'm disheartened by the human condition every day. It's a tragic heartbreak for me every day, because my gift and my curse in some ways is that I can see the full potential of people, and I can see the full of individuals, perhaps, when I sit, in a doctor's office with them, and I can see them choose not to become that. And no matter how many times you show them a path forward, they have to choose it. And to choose that path forward towards healing, you have to believe yourself deserving of it, which means you need to see yourself as valuable, which is not what humans feel about ourselves right now.
And that's the separation wound. And so if we knew we were divine beings, said the astrologer, that was being orchestrated by an intelligence so far beyond us, we'd be humbled by the very presence of our existence. But instead, that stupid little ego with the funny little toxicity that's captured by an appetite of feeling like there's not enough seems to take up so much airtime. So announcement, podcast, Debra Silverman. I do believe in astrology. I do believe in Zach Bush. I am so honored. Everyone that I told I was doing this interview was like, you're really going to like him. I was like, okay, another one of those. No, you are a class in your own. I mean, Aquarius, Pluto, the yod pointing to Saturn, your moon in Capricorn, who's so serious, and the Scorpio that likes to go underneath the building and underneath the car and goes and he has no earth in his chart, but it didn't stop him.
North Node in Capricorn.
Good catch. And the moon, well, that's not really a planet. So you only have one. It's called a singleton in astrology. There's only one planet on Earth. But God said, don't give him any more Earth. For God's sake, he works so hard. Well, he'll never sleep.
I am the Earth.
I am the Earth. I am the Earth. Thank you so much, Zach, for what you're bringing to the world. I don't know how it is. And by the way, I lived the other half of my life in Boulder, Colorado.
Oh, amazing. How lovely.
I'm going to be out there just in 1 month. Yeah. So just want to acknowledge that your presence and your commitment, I feel the severity of your soul having signed up on the ink that will never be erased. I'm taking care of Mom Earth. And they said, Zach, dun, 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 we're dropping you in Boulder now. Here's your grandma. Here's all you need. Ready, set, go. And then 2010 came and slapped you. Saturn was squaring Saturn, by the way. It was what we call a Saturn cycle. And good news is you're in a really positive era right now because you fell in love.
Fell in love with myself and this life and the human journey, because we are going to pick the right thing, and the old humanity will go extinct. And it will be such a relief to see that wounded, egoic humanity go its way.
And the transition, can you talk about this? Because this is what I have a very dear friend who's writing a book on all the ice ages and how we're coming into a warming up cycle. And this is not an unnatural era, but can you talk about the transition? Is there any wisdom, the regenerative soil, the regeneration of our own gut, which is a symbol of the soil? And then how are we going to make it through that threshold of letting go, knowing that there'll be so much death and destruction in the name of creation?
My third subspecialty was in hospice and palliative care, and I was admitting 80 patients a week to my hospice service. And when you see that much death, you quickly realize that there's no such thing as an end point, and death is a rebirth rather than an end. And that's where we are as a human being, as a human species. We are in our hospice moment. We can predict our own extinction within the next 60 years as an amalgamation of our rapidly rising infertility and our rapidly rising chronic diseases. And so the humanity that we know today will go extinct in 60 years, 80 years at a stretch, 100 years if we get a prayer, or we rebirth. And about 10% of patients that are admitted to hospice have to be discharged from hospice because in finding out that they are at the end of something, they let go of everything they were holding on to, and they start to reevaluate what is valuable in life. And in that, they discover themselves. And in discovering themselves, they immediately become healthy. And they revert their diseases. I've seen so many people, resolve their pancreatic cancers or other things that we think of as completely incurable as medical doctors. And it happens when they let go of their emotional attachment to what they believe. And when we let go of the emotional narrative or reality that we live in and become a physical being rather than an emotional body, we can supersede all kinds of disease and heal so fast. And humanity is going to do that. I believe there's a subset within humanity that is already doing this, is already letting go of our emotional attachment to our journey and already exiting the victim perpetrator coin that has flipped again and again over our 200,000 year history. And we're finding out that that was only one coin in the purse, and we are opening up a whole realization of new gold that lies within us as we let go of that limited belief system of either we have to become perpetrator or victim. And when we find out that we can actually be a creative force and join in a co-creative beauty for nature rather than perpetrate or victimize, it's an incredible exit. And I watch people all around me now rebirthing into this new reality, and the joy that they hold within them is so infectious. And I believe that's our next pandemic.
The infection of falling in love. I love this so much. I too watched a film called Choosing Earth. I don't know if you ever saw that. And the woman who wrote The Soul of Money was on that. I'm just blanking on her name for a second. Lynn Twist. And she looked right into the camera and she said, we are in hospice. So we're either going to celebrate the transition without the judgment that death, Mr. Scorpio, is a bad thing. It's a transition, or we're going to wake up inside the dream and let this be a miracle that we didn't see coming. So that's what I see with you, and your invitation to me is, I have a lot of emotional charge in this life because I care so much. And at the same time, my life's work, said the astrologer, is to pull people into Switzerland. I call it neutral. Step up here off the planet, look back at us, be in the presence of kindness, and know without a shadow of a doubt, we're being watched. And those that are watching us that made astrology, that have created this miraculous system, are very compassionate, and they're not going to interrupt until we as a collective make a decision. So you and I have made our decision, and we're bringing with as many people as we can. And while death is a very, very charged word, anything but Switzerland, it has the most charge to it you can have. There is a new framework that is being invited for all of us to ask. So if death were not a scary word, this is a man that worked with hospice for so many years. I too was trained in hospice, having seen it, been up close and seen the beauty of both birth and death. When the evolution of the human species reaches a point where we can accept the unacceptable, where the mind is put in its seat and the attention's on our heart, we breathe deeply, we return to our true nature, and all of a sudden, a miracle that you couldn't have expected will show up. That's my prayer. Let me be surprised. Let me see the human condition reveal itself. And because of you, I've just regained a lot of faith. So thank you for being here today. You've really recaptured for me. Like if Zach, I'm talking to Nancy, your grandma, if Zach could do this and you saw that way back when, I'm telling you, there's some grandkids that are coming behind me who are like Zach Bush, who are going to say, I knew this was happening. I came to help us, and please listen.
There's billions.
There's billions of them. Okay, I'm going to stop this. Not that we're done, but oh my God, this was my newest favorite podcast yet.
Thank you so much for listening. We want to keep this conversation going with you, so please subscribe to our podcast and leave a rating and review to make sure you never miss an episode. Remember, climate activist by day, human by night. Send Debra a DM on Instagram at Debra Silverman Astrology and visit DebraSilvermanAstrology.com. And we're going to leave you like we leave every single episode. Make it your mission to change the world.